Hello and welcome, everyone. I know I've been gone for a little while, but today I'm back with a very interesting case. Today I'll be exploring the Hamburg Rubble Murders, a series of 4 unsolved murders in 1947 that left the city of Hamburg terrified and the police completely bewildered. I'm the Lunar Librarian, and before we get into it, I'd just like to thank everyone who's still subscribed to my channel after my break. I really do appreciate the support, and I've got a lot more videos lined up for everyone. With that being said, let's get right into it. On January 20th, 1947, a group of children were playing in an abandoned factory lot on Baustrasse when they came across the body of a young woman. She was approximately 18 to 20 years old and was found completely naked with no visible wounds or signs of trauma, aside from a millimeter-wide wound on her neck, indicating that she had been strangled with a cord or string. Police immediately began investigating her murder. However, they had almost nothing to go on. Whoever had killed this woman had been very thorough, leaving nothing behind that could connect them to the scene. Even identifying the victim proved impossible. No one stepped forward to identify the body, and her personal effects, including any form of ID she was carrying, which could have been used to identify her, had been stolen, presumably by whoever killed her. At first, police assumed that this woman had simply been the victim of a violent robbery. Other than the strangulation wound left by the cord, there were no signs of struggle or other injuries on her body. Since her valuables were missing, and her lack of traumatic wounds suggested her killer had ambushed her, police assumed that this woman had been attacked and killed for whatever valuables she had. 5 days later, however, this theory would be called into question. On January 25th, 2 scrap collectors were looking for valuable salvage in the rubble of a house in Eimsbüttel. However, instead of finding scrap, the 2 came upon another body in almost identical condition as the first. The second victim, a man approximately 65 to 70 years of age, was also found completely naked with a millimeter-wide strangulation wound around his neck, but no other signs of trauma or struggle. As with the first victim, police were unable to identify this man. With the discovery of a second victim, killed in an almost identical fashion, police escalated their search for the rubble murderer, fearing the possibility that this second victim would not be the last. Tragically, this fear was proven correct just a week after the second victim was discovered, and it would be much worse than any of the investigators imagined. On February 1st, the body of a 6-year-old girl was discovered in an elevator shaft of a bombed-out mattress factory near Billikenau. Her body was found in the same condition as the first 2 victims, and like the others, police were unable to identify her. 11 days later, on February 12th, a 4th and final victim was discovered. This 4th victim was a woman approximately 30 years of age. Like the first 3, she had been found completely naked with a millimeter-wide strangulation wound on her neck, and was also unable to be identified. These final victims drove the city of Hamburg into a panic, as authorities concluded, given the similarities between the 4 victims, that they had all been the work of an unknown serial killer. As the terrified public called out for justice, the Hamburg Homicide Commission was forced to reckon with the reality that the rubble murders were effectively unsolvable. There was no evidence, no witnesses, and no definitive motive that could be established for the killings. Technology like DNA testing that could have provided answers was decades away, and with the means available to them, authorities were unable to turn up any leads whatsoever. Despite the seemingly impossible nature of their task, the commission began investigating anything and everything that could help them discover who the murderer was. The biggest problem investigators faced, however, was the inability to identify any of the victims. None of the victims had any form of ID on their bodies, and despite authorities printing the victims' faces in newspapers, purchasing radio ads describing them, and circulating over 50,000 posters with their faces on them across all 4 occupied territories, no one was able to definitively identify any of the victims. The closest police came was a landlady who claimed that the male victim may have been one of her tenants who had gone missing. This claim was investigated, but ultimately disproved when the missing man contacted his landlady directly, proving that he was still alive and leaving investigators right where they started. Without anyone who could identify the bodies, investigators attempted to compare the victims with the description of known missing persons, which also proved fruitless. Ultimately, police exhausted all available methods to identify the bodies, but every attempt came back with nothing. With no evidence and no possible suspects based on the identity of the victims, police hoped that they could find witnesses who had seen anything relating to the killings. A reward of 5,000 marks and 1,000 cigarettes was offered, but not one reliable witness was found, not even when the reward was raised to 10,000 marks. This is not to say that no one came forward. Between potential witnesses and possible suspects, the Hamburg police interviewed nearly 1,000 people over the course of the investigation. But most of these interviewees were only interested in the reward money, and none of them resulted in any significant leads. Without any suspects, leads, or real evidence to go on, Hamburg police entertained numerous speculative theories over the course of the investigation. Investigator Hans Löhr, head of the Killing Office's inspectorate, offered the most likely of these theories. He believed the victims were family members who had been targeted by the murderer, who Löhr believed was also related to them. He theorized that the Rubble murders were perpetrated by someone attempting to either guarantee an inheritance or make good on an insurance policy they had taken on the victims. Löhr was a respected investigator, and his theory made logical sense, but without any witnesses or identification, it remains essentially impossible to prove. That being said, it also remains the most likely motive for the murders that has been presented to date. In 1949, Hamburg police thought they caught a major break in the case. Rudolf Plehl, a serial killer active in Germany between 1946 and 1947, confessed to the Rubble murders from a cell in Braunschweig prison. Plehl, who could honestly have his own video, was already infamous for a spree of murders which is confirmed to have claimed the lives of 10 victims. At first, he seemed like a plausible suspect for the Rubble murderer. Plehl had claimed to have committed 15 murders he was never convicted of, making it seem possible that the Rubble murders were among them. However, Plehl's confession quickly began to unravel. Plehl, who usually had a very good memory, was unable to give any specific details about any of the 4 murders, and when brought to the scenes where the bodies had been discovered, he failed to correctly identify where they had been found. Plehl, who was prone to exaggerating his crimes, was determined to be lying about his involvement in the Rubble murders to get attention for himself. This false confession was ultimately the closest Hamburg police would come to solving the Rubble murders. Investigation continued for years, with police hoping to at least discover the victims' identities, but no new evidence has ever surfaced since 1947. Public interest in the investigation also continued for years, but without anything to go on, the case eventually went cold. To this day, no new evidence has come to light, and while the investigation files remain available in the Hamburg State Archives, it is extremely unlikely the case will ever be solved. Thank you for watching all the way to the end of the video. Let me know what you thought of this case in the comments below. And if you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like. Any engagement helps more people see my videos, especially since I've been on a bit of a break for the last few months. That being said, I am back now, and I'll be uploading videos a lot more regularly from now on. So if historical true crime is something that interests you, why not subscribe? I have plenty more cases that I'm excited to share with you all. So until next time, I've been the Lunar Librarian. Thank you, and goodbye.